It has been nearly 3 years since a tragedy that got so much attention and happened right here in San Antonio on Quintana Road. Dozens of migrants found inside of a sweltering 18-wheeler. 53 of those people ultimately died because of the conditions that they endured. We're joined now for our KSAT Q&A today by Elliott Woods, who wrote an article with Texas Monthly. And Elliott, you traveled out of the country to go find the families of these victims, to talk to them about their experience, about what they knew about what happened to their loved ones. Can you just start by telling why you felt like that was an important story to tell, and what was that experience like?
Well, I thought it was really important to go see where the victims and the survivors actually came from in Central America and Mexico, because I think there's a tendency in the way that we tell immigration stories, and particularly about the southern border, to almost present them as if people just suddenly materialize at the border and they don't really have any backstory. But of course, every single one of these places came from a very specific place and had a family back home and had something that they were trying to accomplish in the United States. And of course, when they died, that dream was destroyed. And that often meant huge financial losses for their families and other forms of suffering and hardship. And I wanted to go to the places where all of that damage was actually being felt and talk to the people who were experiencing it, and also hear these people's life stories.
You know, Elliott, I had a chance to speak not too long ago with a law enforcement, member of law enforcement who was one of the first on the scene that day at Quintana Road and just spoke unspeakable things that I will not repeat right now here. I think you know what I'm talking about. But how difficult was it to kind of broach this with these families? And was there anything that surprised you in these conversations in terms of just takeaways?
It's always difficult to talk to people about terrible things that have happened to them or to the people that they love. It's something that I've done, unfortunately, too many times over the course of my career working in the Middle East and in Latin America and even here in the United States. So what I always tell people is that they have the wheel in the conversation, and that there are things that I want to talk about. There are things that I want them to show me, so to speak, but that I respect all of their limits. And once you build rapport and really show a willingness to listen, I think people are generally eager to describe what they've been through. One of the things that really stood out to me in my conversations with these families was how going to the United States represents for them, for many of them, what they think is pretty much their only opportunity to get ahead financially. The economic situation in the places where most of the families that I talk to live is very desperate. There just aren't a lot of jobs, especially for young people. The jobs that do exist pay very poorly. So most of the families I spoke to, their loved one had a plan to come to the United States for a certain period of time to work, earn money, and then go home to either buy more land or pay for families' educational expenses or buy a car that they need for work or something like that. That's probably the biggest standout, is that the people in that truck were not seeking asylum. They were coming to the United States to work and to save money and go home.
One of the key points that stuck with me in your article is that despite what happened to these 53 people who died in unspeakable conditions like you're referring to there, Ernie, despite that, a lot of the people you talked to, that's not enough to deter them from trying to make the same journey here. What did they tell you about that?
That's right. There were certainly families that I did speak to who had a younger child, or the person who died had a sibling or even a child of their own. And there were families who said, we will never entertain this idea again. That was the last time. But there were a lot of other families who had members who said, I'm thinking about going because there's no other way to make money. And they also said that even though the news of this incident hit every single one of these communities like a bomb, everybody in these small communities knew about what happened, and the funerals in some cases had hundreds of people. The people that I spoke to said their neighbors are, even after knowing what they know about the tragedy, that they're still making plans to go. People are still going because it's really the basis of the economy in a lot of these places. So, for example, in Guatemala, remittances, meaning the money that workers in the United States send back home to Guatemala, exceeds the total GDP of the country. or
Wow.
the total exports of the country. So it's just critical to their economy that this keeps going, and they know the risks and they do it anyway. I mean, it's shocking to us, I think, but it's something that a lot of people in the world would understand.
We were just, Elliott, kind of shuffling through some of the photos, and I'm seeing them for the first time here. And you see abuelita in the kitchen with the pot, or the family, the little kids with the backpacks and everything. Tell us about those photos and how important they are in terms of just telling the overall story.
Again, I just think it's so important for people to see where the migrants come from. You know, everybody in the United States right now has an idea of what a migrant is, and you know, there's certain projections of the places that migrants come from that situate them in terrible hellholes and awful living conditions. And I thought it was really important to show these people living their daily lives in the places where they're from, so that people can see a more complete story, or I think a more accurate story about where a lot of these migrants come from. And I was especially conscious of the need to photograph families together, as many of the members of the family as I could together, so that you would be able to see the person who's missing. Because these are very tight families in most cases that basically wagered everything on this one person's journey north.
So, Elliott, we know that this week, 2 of the accused smugglers involved in this very case, they're in court, standing trial right now for what happened. When you're talking with these families, does what happens in an American courtroom, what happens right here in San Antonio in a courtroom, does that matter to them? Did they place a lot of importance on that?
I think the short answer is not much. I have certainly kept in touch with families. I'm in fact still keeping in touch with families and keeping them updated on what's happening in the trial. And they're all very interested to know what's going on. But if it weren't for our relationship and our conversations, I'm not sure that news would filter back to where they come from. And one of the mothers told me, a mother from the state of Mexico whose son died, told me that her real problem was with the fact that the smuggler didn't take care of the merchandise. Basically, she was a shop owner, and she said, you know, those people were his merchandise, and she was mad at him for being careless with the cargo, and not really mad about the fact that he was participating in a criminal act that he's now under indictment for. Because I think the existence of human smugglers, for people who depend on human smuggling to access the U.S. labor market, is just kind of taken as a given. So the crime in a lot of people's minds was that the smugglers were careless, not that they were doing the smuggling in the first place.
Elliott Woods, the article in Texas Monthly right now, it's incredible. Those photos, that's just some of what you shared with us. There's so much more in that article. I encourage people to go check it out. And thank you so much, Elliott, for being here with us to talk about your experience.
Thank you very much for having me.
We'll be right back.